Hello, everyone. Welcome. Tonight, we will discuss terrifying events, true stories that have occurred on this earth. Get comfortable, stay relaxed, and let's dive into it on Midnight Lullabies. Story 1. Imagine living in an apartment for years, never knowing that behind your walls, a body was decaying in silence. It was an ordinary day for cleaners working in a quiet residential complex in Alderley, a northern suburb of Brisbane. They had been assigned routine maintenance in the basement, a place most tenants rarely thought about. The air was musty, the kind of stale scent that lingers in old buildings. As they moved through the space, something seemed off. A section of the wall didn't look quite right. It was different from the rest. The workers hesitated for a moment before deciding to investigate. They chipped away at the wall. At first, it was just dust and plaster. Then, something wrapped appeared underneath. A few more strikes, and the hidden truth revealed itself. The air filled with an odor so overwhelming, so foul, that they had to step back. What they uncovered was beyond anything they had ever imagined. Inside the wall, the body of a woman lay concealed, wrapped, placed out of sight, and forgotten. It had been there for years, hidden away while life continued on in the apartments above. Investigators identified her as Tanya Lee Glover, a woman who had seemingly vanished from the world without a single missing person report filed on her behalf. Forensics determined that Glover had been dead for over a decade, likely killed sometime between 2009 and 2010. But how did she end up behind a wall in an apartment complex where she wasn't even a registered tenant? More importantly, why had no one looked for her? Glover had moved to Queensland from New South Wales in 2006 and lived alone in Fortitude Valley until 2010. She was vision and hearing impaired, known to be reclusive. No police records, no known family contact in years, and no official reports about her disappearance. It was as if she had vanished unnoticed. Detective Superintendent Andrew Massingham called it peculiar and concerning. The autopsy revealed signs of trauma. This wasn't a natural death, it was a homicide. And yet, for years, the crime remained buried, quite literally, within the walls of an unsuspecting residential building. Stay with me, because in just a few moments, we'll uncover the deeper layers of this case, the strange connections, the unsettling gaps in time, and the haunting question that lingers to this day: who knew Tanya Lee Glover well enough to want her gone, and why was her body hidden for so long? We'll uncover how this brutal crime remained hidden, until the air itself betrayed the darkness buried within. Brisbane, Australia. A city known for its sun-drenched streets, riverside views, and bustling neighborhoods. Among them, a modest apartment complex stood quietly, its walls holding a dark truth that no one suspected. Tanya Lee Glover was 38 years old when she was last seen alive. A woman with a troubled past, she had been living in a housing complex designed for individuals with disabilities, about 3 miles from where her body was eventually found. But no one came looking for Tanya. Her family had lost contact. There were no concerned friends knocking on doors. And for over a decade, she simply vanished into oblivion. For years, no one questioned her absence. No one knew that her final resting place was just a few feet away from the lives of everyday tenants. But the walls knew. And over time, the walls started to talk. Strange complaints began surfacing in late 2022. A smell. Faint at first, then unbearable. Tenants described it as something sickly, something rotting. Some reported hearing noises, shuffling sounds, coming from a unit that had supposedly been vacant for years. At first, the landlord dismissed the reports. Perhaps a dead rodent. Maybe a plumbing issue. But when maintenance workers finally investigated, what they found defied all logic. December 7, 2022. A day that the residents of this Brisbane apartment complex will never forget. When the wall was opened, the secret it held for 12 long years was finally exposed. Wrapped tightly in clothing and bedding, lay the remains of Tanya Lee Glover. Decomposed beyond recognition. A human tragedy hidden in plain sight. Forensic teams worked tirelessly, but identifying the body wasn't easy. DNA analysis stretched over months. It wasn't until August 2, 2023, that investigators could confirm what had happened to Tanya all those years ago. A life lost. A crime buried. But who was responsible? Police soon turned their attention to one woman, a 61-year-old former resident of the same complex. She wasn't a stranger. In fact, she and Tanya had been acquainted. But they weren't exactly friends. The nature of their relationship remains unclear. What is known, however, is that sometime in 2010, this woman allegedly ended Tanya's life. And instead of alerting authorities, she hid the body. I've been in the police for 35 years, I've never come across anything like this. But the horror didn't end with concealment. This suspect is also accused of committing fraud, allegedly continuing to claim government benefits in Tanya's name for years after her death. The case is still unfolding, and authorities are determined to ensure that Tanya gets the justice she was denied for so long. But the haunting question remains, how does someone vanish for over a decade, and no one notices? December 7, 2022. What started as a routine cleaning job quickly turned into something out of a nightmare. Maintenance workers, tasked with repairs in an aging apartment complex, began pulling away at the deteriorating drywall. The moment they breached the surface, an unbearable stench filled the air, a sickening combination of decay and trapped rot, hidden away for over a decade. Behind layers of insulation and dust, something emerged. At first, it looked like a bundle of old rags, discarded in the hollow space. But then, human remains. Wrapped tightly in clothing and bedding, the body of a woman was hidden within the very walls of the place she once called home. The woman, as later confirmed through forensic testing, was Tanya Lee Glover. She had vanished sometime in 2010, yet no one had ever reported her missing. She had been left, forgotten, behind a barrier of plaster and paint for 12 years. How could this go unnoticed? How could a body remain hidden in a city apartment complex, just 5 kilometers from the heart of Brisbane, for over a decade? The answer lies in a tragic mixture of neglect, deception, and the cruel reality of isolation. Investigators believe Glover was murdered in early 2010 before her body was hidden in a crawl space. The structure of the wall itself acted as an unintentional tomb, masking any immediate odors as the body decomposed. The question remains, did the perpetrator deliberately conceal the crime in a way that would evade discovery? In cases where bodies are sealed within walls, decomposition gases have limited ways to escape. The odor might have been noticeable at first, but over time, structural barriers and changes in airflow could have minimized detection. The use of clothing and bedding may have also played a role in delaying the spread of scent. Was there an attempt to cover up any smells? Investigators considered painted-over drywall, sealed vents, or even deliberate distractions that could have misled tenants and building staff. Shockingly, nobody had ever filed a missing persons report for Tanya Lee Glover. Her parents had simply assumed she had moved elsewhere, unaware that their daughter's life had ended in silence and secrecy. As the grim discovery sent shockwaves through the city, police launched an urgent investigation. The report was first made by cleaners working on site, who immediately contacted the property's landlord. Soon after, law enforcement arrived, sealing off the area as forensic teams got to work. Authorities needed answers. Who was this woman? How did she end up behind a wall? And, most importantly, who was responsible? Detectives worked tirelessly, piecing together clues from forensic evidence and records. By August 2023, DNA analysis finally confirmed the victim's identity, Tanya Lee Glover, a woman who had once lived in Fortitude Valley but had seemingly disappeared off the face of the earth. Detective Massingham held a press conference and said, "We are treating this as a homicide investigation. The circumstances are deeply concerning, particularly considering the vulnerable status of the victim. We urge anyone who knew Tanya between 2006 and 2010 to come forward." But there was more. On March 28, 2025, after nearly 3 years of investigation, police arrested a 61-year-old woman in Townsville, charging her with murder, fraud, and misconduct with a corpse. The suspect, who had lived in the same complex as Glover, had been hiding in plain sight all these years. The case was now closer than ever to justice, but questions remained. What was the motive? And how had she managed to get away with it for so long? How was she connected to the victim? The arrest sent shockwaves through the community. A 61-year-old woman, a person who had walked these same hallways, perhaps even exchanged pleasantries with neighbors, was now charged with murder, fraud, and misconduct with a corpse. But who was she? And how was she connected to Tanya Lee Glover? Investigators uncovered a chilling connection. The suspect was not a random stranger. She had known Tanya. She had lived in the same apartment complex, possibly even interacted with her before the fateful night in 2010 when Tanya disappeared. The woman, whose name has not yet been released to the public, had resided in the same building during the time of Tanya's disappearance. It is believed that she may have had access to Tanya's unit, and police are now looking into whether she was one of the last people to see Tanya alive. But why? Why would a woman in her late 40s, now in her 60s, murder and then conceal a body for over a decade? Detective Massingham in a press conference said, "We are examining several possible motives. We have not ruled out financial gain, personal disputes, or other criminal activities." One theory stood out among investigators: money. Tanya was a vulnerable woman, living a reclusive life. She was vision and hearing impaired, disconnected from most of society, and had no active online presence. Could someone have exploited that? Authorities began tracing financial records, looking for suspicious activity that could link the suspect to Tanya's disappearance. And then, they found something. For nearly 3 years, detectives sifted through thousands of pages of documents, looking for the thread that tied the suspect to the crime. One key discovery: suspicious financial transactions. Bank records showed that Tanya's government benefits, which she should have stopped collecting after 2010, were still being withdrawn for years after her death. Detectives discovered irregular banking activity linked to a secondary account, which had been accessed long after Tanya vanished. The transactions were small enough to avoid detection at first, but they painted a damning picture. Someone had been stealing from a dead woman. In cases like this, criminals often continue withdrawing funds from their victims, using forged documents or online transfers to make it seem as if the person is still alive. But financial fraud wasn't the only damning piece of evidence. Investigators re-examined old security footage from the apartment complex, grainy, aged video from 2010 that showed the suspect entering Tanya's unit late at night and leaving hours later carrying large bags. Then, there was the DNA evidence. Tests revealed trace amounts of the suspect's DNA on the bedding Tanya's body had been wrapped in, an undeniable forensic link to the crime. Between the financial evidence, security footage, and forensic DNA results, we were able to establish a clear and direct connection between the accused and the crime. The woman was arrested in March 2025, in Townsville, Queensland. Her charge: murder, financial fraud, and unlawful disposal of a body. But there was one lingering question: would she confess? The suspect refused to speak at first, offering only vague denials and contradicting statements. But detectives kept pushing, confronting her with the irrefutable forensic and financial evidence. Slowly, cracks began to appear in her story. You were in her apartment the night she disappeared. Your DNA was found on her bedding. Do you want to tell us what really happened? We have bank records showing withdrawals made in her name, years after she was dead. You were the only one who had access. Still, the woman never offered a full confession. Instead, she shifted blame, claiming she had no idea how her DNA ended up at the crime scene, that she had never taken money, and that she had nothing to do with Tanya's disappearance. But the forensic evidence told a different story. Authorities brought in a criminal psychologist to analyze the suspect's behavior, mindset, and possible motive. He said, "This case has elements of both financial manipulation and extreme detachment. If she was collecting money from Tanya's accounts for years, it suggests premeditation and understanding." With overwhelming evidence stacked against her, the 61-year-old woman now faces trial. The question remains, will she finally reveal the truth? The trial is expected to uncover even more about the twisted reality behind Tanya's tragic end, who else might have known, what really happened that night in 2010, and whether this crime could have been prevented. For Tanya Lee Glover, a woman who had slipped through the cracks of society, justice is finally within reach. But one question still haunts investigators: was this her only victim? As the trial loomed, investigators stumbled upon a chilling possibility, one that turned this from a singular crime into something even darker. Was this part of a pattern? Could the 61-year-old woman have committed other crimes, hidden in plain sight, just as she had for over a decade? Detectives began re-examining other unsolved disappearances in the area, especially cases where the victims had no close family, limited financial independence, or were vulnerable like Tanya. One case in particular stood out. A woman named Rachel Simmons, a former resident of the same apartment complex, had gone missing in 2007, 3 years before Tanya vanished. Rachel had no next of kin, and though she was reported missing by a coworker, her case went cold quickly. No body, no suspects, just another forgotten name in the archives of missing persons. Then, a disturbing pattern emerged. In both cases, the victims were vulnerable women, with few people to advocate for them. Both lived in the same building, where the suspect had also resided. Both disappeared without a trace, but their financial accounts remained active for years after they were last seen. Could it be a coincidence? An investigative journalist said, "If this woman got away with hiding a body inside a wall for over a decade, who's to say it was her first time?" The apartment complex became the epicenter of a new investigation. Detectives and forensic teams scanned the building with ground-penetrating radar, searching for more hidden horrors. What they found sent shivers through the department. When police uncovered Tanya's body, they were stunned by how meticulously hidden it was. The suspect had gone to great lengths to ensure no one would ever find it. Using forensic analysis, experts reconstructed how the wall had been modified. The suspect hollowed out a section behind the drywall, likely working late at night when no one would notice. She wrapped the body in bedding, plastic, and insulation materials, attempting to muffle the scent of decomposition. After sealing the wall back up, she repainted it, blending it seamlessly with the rest of the room. The most chilling part. The next tenant lived in that unit for years, completely unaware that they were sleeping just inches away from death. The former tenant said when questioned, "I lived there for almost 5 years. 5 years. I put my furniture against that wall. I had no idea." The sheer proximity of the horror sent a wave of terror through the community. But the case wasn't just about one hidden corpse. Investigators now feared there could be others. Despite overwhelming evidence, the biggest questions remained unanswered. Did she have more victims? Could Tanya's murder have been prevented? Was there a chance to catch her sooner? Detective Massingham said, "There were red flags, the complaints from neighbors about the smell, the fact that Tanya's benefits were still being used after she vanished. We should have connected the dots sooner." The most haunting thought. Tanya Lee Glover was reported missing in 2010. Her body was found in 2023. For 13 years, her story went untold, unheard, forgotten. Would she have ever been found, if that one maintenance worker hadn't noticed something was wrong? And now, the final question loomed. Was she truly the only one? In the weeks following the gruesome discovery, the case of Tanya Lee Glover captivated the nation. What began as a missing persons investigation had become a nightmarish true crime saga, unraveling one of the most disturbing discoveries in recent history. And at the center of it all, a 61-year-old woman, now facing the full force of the law. Following her arrest, authorities charged the suspect with murder, tampering with evidence, and abuse of a corpse. As the case moved toward trial, prosecutors painted a picture of calculated horror, a woman who not only took a life but meticulously concealed it for over a decade. Prosecutor, this was not an impulsive crime. This was carefully orchestrated, hidden in plain sight. And she thought she would get away with it. But the most harrowing moments came when Tanya's family took the stand. Tanya's sister, her voice breaking, spoke. For 13 years, we begged for answers. For 13 years, she was right there, just a few feet away, and we never knew. The courtroom fell silent. If the building had been demolished, or if no one had ever broken through that wall, Tanya would have remained lost forever. The jury deliberated for just 3 hours before returning with a verdict. Guilty. Sentencing was swift, life in prison without the possibility of parole. Justice was served. But the scars it left behind, those would never fade. For the residents of this quiet complex, life would never be the same. Neighbors, once oblivious to the horrors lurking behind their walls, now struggled to sleep at night. Some moved out immediately, unable to shake the feeling that their home had become a crime scene. But what about the apartment itself? Rumors spread quickly. Some claimed to hear noises coming from the empty unit at night. Others refused to set foot inside, believing the apartment to be haunted. A handful of tenants even reported nightmares, seeing a woman's shadow standing in the doorway. A former tenant said, "I don't believe in ghosts, but, man, after what happened there, you couldn't pay me to live in that place." Landlords struggled to rent it out. New tenants never stayed long. Some wondered, could the echoes of the past still linger in that space? Or was it simply the weight of knowing that, for 13 years, a forgotten life rotted behind? We like to believe that the walls around us protect us. That they keep out the dangers of the world. But sometimes, those walls hold secrets of their own. How many other missing persons cases remain unsolved, simply because no one has thought to check behind the walls? How many homes, apartments, and offices might be hiding something terrible, just inches from where we eat, sleep, and live our daily lives? And the question that lingers, hauntingly, as we close this story. If there was something hidden behind your walls, would you even want to know? Story 2. A quiet suburban street. A house of faith. A family known for their smiles, their prayers, their unwavering devotion. Inside, a father, a youth pastor, who had dedicated his life to teaching children about love, kindness, and faith. But that night, something changed. It was a little past midnight when the silence of the neighborhood was shattered by the sound of frantic pounding on a neighbor's door. Barefoot, trembling, and covered in blood, several children stood outside, their eyes wide with terror. "Dad has a knife," one of them gasped. Inside, the house was a scene of horror. Blood stained the walls. A fire smoldered in the basement. And lying on the floor, their mother, wounded, crying out in pain. Upstairs, in the dim hallway, the man responsible for it all stood at the top of the stairs, staring down. In his hand, a knife, slick with the blood of the people he was supposed to love most. His son, just a child, looked up at him with pleading eyes. "Dad, why do you have the knife?" The question cut deeper than any blade. Matthew Richards, father, husband, youth pastor, had done the unthinkable. But what had driven him to this moment? What was hiding beneath the surface of his seemingly perfect life? And what could make a man turn against his own family in such a brutal way? The most haunting part of this story isn't just the crime, it's the truth that was uncovered afterward. Shawnee, Kansas. A quiet suburban community where life moved at a measured, predictable pace. Nestled in this landscape of churches, parks, and well-kept homes was the Richards family, seemingly no different from any other. A devoted father, a loving mother, and 5 children who had their whole lives ahead of them. Their home was filled with laughter, prayer, and the simple moments that make up family life. Neighbors would often see the Richards children playing outside or heading to church with their father, Matthew, a trusted children's pastor at Crossroads Christian Church. He was a man of God, a mentor, and a guide to the young souls of his congregation. Parents entrusted their children to him, believing he was a man of integrity, a beacon of moral strength. By all accounts, the Richards family embodied the ideals of faith and community. But no one knew what was unfolding behind the closed doors of their home. In the halls of Crossroads Christian Church, Matthew Richards was a well-known figure. He spoke of faith, love, and responsibility. He taught children the importance of honesty and virtue, guiding them with scripture and parables. He was a man parents pointed to as an example, a trusted leader who would never betray his values. Yet, as the sun set on September 15, 2023, Matthew Richards was not preparing for Sunday's sermon. He was wrestling with a reality he had hidden from everyone, including his wife. The family was about to be evicted. The house they had built their lives in, the place where they prayed, celebrated, and comforted one another, was slipping from their grasp. And no one, not his wife, not his church, not his children, had any idea. According to police reports, Matthew had concealed their financial struggles, allowing the illusion of stability to persist. When the eviction date loomed closer, he didn't tell his family. They hadn't packed, they hadn't planned, because he never allowed them to. And then, sometime that evening, a plan took shape. A decision that no one could have foreseen. Neighbors had seen the Richards family together many times before, always appearing close-knit, always smiling. But in hindsight, there were things that didn't quite add up. Subtle, almost imperceptible signs that something wasn't right. One neighbor recalled hearing arguments in the weeks leading up to the tragedy. Nothing alarming, just the usual tension that comes with family life. Another noticed Matthew's demeanor had changed. He was quieter, less engaging. A pastor who usually had comforting words for everyone now seemed distant, lost in his own thoughts. But no one could have predicted what was coming next. In the quiet early hours of September 16, 2023, as his family slept peacefully in their beds, Matthew Richards picked up a knife. What followed would leave an entire community reeling. At first glance, the Richards family seemed like the embodiment of small-town, Midwestern stability. Matthew Richards, a well-respected youth pastor in Shawnee, Kansas, had spent years building a reputation as a devoted man of faith. Parents trusted him with their children's spiritual guidance, and his family was often seen together at church events, smiling, praying, and living what appeared to be a wholesome, faith-filled life. But behind closed doors, the walls were beginning to crack. Over the months leading up to that fateful night, there were subtle but alarming shifts in Matthew's behavior. His once charismatic sermons became erratic, his tone shifting unpredictably between hopeful and ominous. Parishioners noticed he spoke of trials and tests more frequently, sometimes hinting that darkness was lurking just around the corner. Financial stress weighed heavily on the family, though no one outside their home knew just how dire the situation had become. Richards had been hiding the truth from his wife. They were about to be evicted. The very day of the attack was supposed to be the day they lost their home. Instead of facing the truth, he devised a nightmarish plan to erase his problems entirely. The air in the Richards household was eerily still that night. The children had gone to bed, unaware that their father had already set his plan into motion. At 3:45 a.m., chaos erupted. According to investigators, Richards first set fire to the basement, igniting piles of wood and clothing. Then, he moved through the house with a knife in hand, entering his children's bedrooms one by one. In their terror, the children tried to escape, running out of the house, pounding on neighbors' doors for help. One child later recounted the horror to police. "We were all in bed when Dad came around stabbing everyone. Screams shattered the night. Blood stained the walls." Richard's wife fought desperately against him, crying out his name, trying to wrestle the knife from his grip. "Dispatcher, 911, what's your emergency?" Caller, child's voice, frantic, "My dad, he's hurt everyone." Dispatcher, "Are you safe? Where is he now?" Caller, he has a knife. My mom, my brothers, my sister, they're hurt. There's fire. The 911 call sent officers racing to the scene. The first responders arrived to a house engulfed in flames. Then, a sudden boom, a small explosion rocked the garage doors outward. Smoke billowed from the windows as officers stormed the front door. Inside, the scene was worse than they could have imagined. Blood spattered the walls. 5 victims lay wounded, their tiny bodies slashed and struggling for life. Among them was Richard's wife, gasping for breath, still conscious enough to point at her husband. Matthew Richards was found in the chaos, reeling from smoke inhalation. When officers pulled him outside, his words chilled them to the bone. "I stabbed my family," he admitted. One of his sons had a deep slash across his neck. Another was stabbed in the chest and stomach so severely that his internal organs were exposed. His daughter had a wound across her arm. The children who managed to escape ran barefoot through the neighborhood, pounding on doors, seeking safety from the man who was supposed to protect them. As police placed Richards under arrest, he muttered one final statement. "I'm a monster." It was the early hours of September 16, 2023, in Shawnee, Kansas. A quiet neighborhood was about to become the scene of an unthinkable crime. First responders rushed to the home of Matthew Lee Richards, a 41-year-old children's pastor, after reports of a house fire and a family in distress. What they found inside would shake even the most hardened investigators. Richards, barely coherent, was discovered with self-inflicted wounds. He sat amid the chaos, his clothes smeared with blood, muttering incomprehensible words, perhaps prayers, perhaps confessions. Scattered around him were disturbing handwritten notes, filled with religious messages and cryptic phrases. Some seemed like letters of remorse, while others were scriptures twisted into desperate justifications for what he had done. In the middle of this horror was a child, one of 5, bleeding but conscious. His voice was weak, but his words would haunt those who heard them forever. Why did Daddy do this? A question so simple, yet so devastating. He and his siblings had been asleep in their beds when their father began his attack. Some fought back. Others never even saw it coming. One of the children suffered a horrific abdominal wound so deep that it exposed internal organs. As firefighters worked to put out the flames, paramedics rushed to save the innocent. The scene was one of devastation, a house of faith turned into a house of terror. At the police station, the reality of the situation became even darker. During his interrogation, Richards admitted to the unthinkable. "I stabbed my family." No hesitation. No denial. Just those chilling words. When investigators pressed further, he revealed his motive, a deadly cocktail of financial ruin and a warped sense of salvation. Richards hadn't told his wife that they were on the verge of eviction. Their home, their security, their stability, all of it was about to be taken away. And in his mind, he made a horrifying choice: better to end their lives than let them suffer through poverty. The religious pastor, the community leader, the man trusted with guiding children in faith, had convinced himself that death was a mercy. His church had once described him as a man devoted to God and family. Now, they condemned his actions with shock and sorrow. The betrayal was complete. But despite everything, the victim survived. His wife and children, forever scarred, had defied the odds. They lived through a nightmare that should never have happened. The courtroom was silent as Matthew Lee Richards, once a trusted youth pastor, stood before the judge. After pleading guilty to 2 counts of attempted first-degree murder, he was sentenced to nearly 30 years in prison. His crimes had sent shockwaves through Shawnee, Kansas, and beyond. As he faced his family, Richards expressed remorse. His voice wavered as he admitted, "My lies became my seeds, and I buried them until they grew into a giant crop of consequences," a haunting metaphor for the destruction he wrought. But for the victims, including his wife and children, words could never undo what had happened. The physical and emotional scars would last a lifetime. The church that once welcomed Richards as a guide for their youth had to come to terms with an unthinkable reality. How had someone they trusted with their children committed such an act? Though the community rallied around the victims, the congregation struggled to find solace in faith after the horror that unfolded. For the surviving son who had asked, "Dad, why do you have the knife?" the question would never be answered. He and his siblings bore not just the wounds of that night but the unfathomable betrayal of a father who was supposed to protect them. Moving forward would mean learning to live with the unthinkable. Was there a way this tragedy could have been prevented? Richard's descent into violence was driven by financial desperation. His family had no idea they were about to be evicted on the very day of the attack. He had hidden their dire situation, allowing the pressure to build until it erupted in bloodshed. But why did he snap in such a brutal, calculated way? He had planned the attack, setting fire to his own home before taking up the knife. Even when confronted by police, he did not deny his actions, stating in chilling finality, "I stabbed my kids, detective. I stabbed my wife." To this day, no one fully understands what drove this youth pastor to transform into a man capable of such horror. His crimes serve as a grim reminder that sometimes, darkness lurks where we least expect it. And for those who survived that night, the echoes of their father's madness will never truly fade. As the courtroom doors opened, the weight of the tragedy hung heavy in the air. The once respected youth pastor, Matthew Richards, now stood before a judge, facing multiple charges, including 5 counts of attempted murder and aggravated arson. Prosecutors painted a grim picture, an act of sheer desperation stemming from financial ruin and personal deception. During his confession, Richards referred to himself as a monster, admitting that he had not been honest with his wife about their impending eviction. Instead of confronting reality, he had chosen to orchestrate a horrific attack in the dead of night, believing it was his only way out. The courtroom was silent as his surviving family members wrestled with the horror of what had been done to them. The scars, both physical and emotional, would remain long after the gavel fell. The community struggled to process the betrayal. Richards had been a trusted figure, a man of faith who had guided children in their spiritual journeys. Now, his name would be forever linked to violence and deception. For his surviving children, the psychological toll was immeasurable. One of them, still in shock, had uttered the heartbreaking question. "Why did Daddy do this?" The question lingered, echoing in the minds of those trying to make sense of an unthinkable act. Meanwhile, the church he once served sought to support the victims, setting up a benefit fund to help them recover. Was this tragedy preventable? Were there warning signs, subtle cries for help that had gone unnoticed? Richards had meticulously hidden his financial troubles. No one knew they were about to be evicted. His actions seemed premeditated. He had planned to set the house ablaze long before carrying out the attack. And yet, to this day, no one truly understands what snapped inside his mind. Perhaps the most chilling thought of all. If it weren't for the small explosion that alerted neighbors and the swift response of authorities, this story could have ended in complete devastation. What do you think pushed this pastor to commit such a horrifying act? Could this tragedy have been prevented, or was it inevitable? Story 3. A young life stolen. 2 innocent people convicted. A system meant to protect, failed them. This is the story of a crime that shattered lives, a confession extracted through fear, and a truth buried for 17 years, until now. I didn't do this. I swear to God. Please, I'm telling the truth. The crime was brutal. A man gunned down in cold blood. Witnesses said they saw everything. Within days, law enforcement had their suspects, a 15-year-old boy and a 20-year-old woman. They didn't know each other, but their fates would soon be tragically intertwined. Investigators pressed hard. The interrogation stretched on. The boy, barely a teenager, was questioned for hours. Over 200 times, he insisted he was innocent. He pleaded for someone, anyone, to believe him. His cries went unanswered. Life in prison, the judge declared. The years ticked by. A mother missed out on raising her daughter. A teenager grew into a man behind bars. Justice had spoken. Or had it? Then, years later, a young law student stumbled upon the case. The evidence, the inconsistencies, the confession that never should have happened. It all led to a chilling revelation: the wrong people had been locked away. The real killers, still free. I couldn't ignore it, the student would later say. I knew something was wrong. And once I started digging, I couldn't stop. In a shocking turn of events, after 6,415 days in prison, the truth came out. Their convictions were overturned. Charlotte Playtes and Lombardo Palacios were finally free. I feel like I was born all over again, Palacios whispered as he stepped into the sunlight. But the fight isn't over. The system that failed them must answer for its mistakes. The real killers still haunt the past. And the scars left behind, they may never heal. Because this isn't just a story about a crime. It's a story about injustice. And it's a story that demands to be told. Los Angeles, 2007. A city of dreams, where the night pulses with energy, and the streets never sleep. But on one fateful evening, a life was stolen, and with it, the futures of two innocent people would be rewritten forever. Hector Flores was just 19 years old. Born and raised in East Hollywood, Hector was a dreamer. A son, a friend, a fiancé. He worked tirelessly at a local auto shop, saving up for a future he believed in. He loved fast cars, late-night music sessions, and, more than anything, his fiancée, Ana Castillo. Ana was there the night it happened. She lived it, survived it, and in the days that followed, she would become the key witness in a case that would send two innocent people to prison. June 15, 2007. It was supposed to be just another Friday night. The city was awake, as it always was. But at 11:42 p.m., the sound of gunfire shattered the calm. Hector Flores was behind the wheel of his car, parked in front of the store. He never saw it coming. A figure approached, raised a gun, and fired. 4 shots. 2 hit Hector. 1 hit Ana. No clear images. No immediate suspects. Just fear, and an urgent need for answers. A young man shot dead in his car, his fiancée wounded but alive. Tonight, the community is left shaken and searching for answers. The city grieved. The police scrambled for leads. And the pressure to solve the case mounted by the hour. Then, a breakthrough, or so they thought. A name emerged. A face. A suspect. And from that moment on, the case would take a turn that no one saw coming. The murder of Hector Flores took place in East Hollywood in 2007. Flores was shot and killed in his car in front of a 99-cent store, while his fiancée, who was in the passenger seat, was wounded but survived. The initial investigation suggested that the crime was gang-related, with law enforcement focusing on suspects affiliated with the White Fence Gang. However, there was no physical evidence connecting any particular individuals to the crime scene. The Los Angeles Police Department, LAPD, faced significant pressure to solve the case. Their investigation relied heavily on eyewitness testimonies and a controversial interrogation process. Lombardo Palacios, who was only 15 at the time, was subjected to a coercive interrogation. Despite initially maintaining his innocence for nearly 2 hours, he ultimately confessed after being misled by detectives, who falsely claimed they had video evidence of him committing the murder. The prosecution's case was primarily built on the testimony of 3 key witnesses, Flores' fiancée and 2 young women who were in the parking lot preparing to go to a nightclub. They identified Palacios from a set of photographs, but later admitted in court that they were not certain. Similarly, Charlotte Playtes was identified from a limited selection of images, with her picture being one of only 2 women included in the lineup. Despite these inconsistencies, their testimonies played a crucial role in securing convictions. Palacios and Playtes were arrested based on weak and unreliable evidence. Palacios' coerced confession became the cornerstone of the case against him. Playtes, who was pregnant at the time, was identified based on flawed witness accounts but never confessed. Notably, the two did not even know each other, further highlighting the weakness of the case against them. During the trial, no physical evidence linked either defendant to the crime. Instead, the prosecution relied entirely on the coerced confession and the uncertain eyewitness identifications. Despite these issues, both were convicted in 2009 and sentenced to 50 years to life in prison. This wrongful conviction underscores major flaws in the justice system, including the reliance on unreliable witness testimonies and coercive interrogation techniques, especially in cases involving minors. In the years that followed Charlotte Playtes and Lombardo Palacios's wrongful conviction, the truth remained buried beneath layers of false testimony, coerced confessions, and a justice system unwilling to question its own failures. But there was someone out there who knew more than she had ever admitted. Her name was Marisol Ortega, the niece of a man with a dark past. She had grown up in East Hollywood, just a few blocks from where Hector Flores was murdered that fateful night. But while the world moved on, the memories of what she had witnessed refused to fade. Marisol had always known that something about the case wasn't right. The names of the convicted, Playtes and Palacios, meant nothing to her. They weren't part of her world. But her uncle, Javier Ortega, a man with deep ties to the White Fence Gang, was. She remembered the night of the murder all too well. The hushed conversations, the whispered threats. She had overheard Javier and his closest associates talking about cleaning up loose ends and making sure that the story sticks. At just 14 years old, she was too scared to question what that meant. For years, she convinced herself that it wasn't her place to say anything. But deep down, she knew, her uncle was involved in something terrible. Why did Marisol stay silent? The answer was simple: fear. Javier Ortega wasn't just a name in police files, he was a man known for violence, a man who had built his reputation on making sure no one crossed him. For Marisol, speaking up wasn't just dangerous, it was unthinkable. But there was another reason for her silence. A part of her didn't want to believe that her uncle, the man who had taken care of her after her mother's passing, the man who had bought her school supplies and made sure she was safe from the streets, was capable of such a crime. It was easier to pretend it wasn't real. The years passed, but the weight of the secret never left her. She had seen Charlotte Playtes' face on the news, a woman who had lost 17 years of her life for a crime she hadn't committed. She had read about Lombardo Palacios, who was only 15 years old when he was forced into a confession, locked away before he had even begun to live. Marisol had moments, so many moments, where she nearly came forward. A drunken night when she almost blurted it out to a friend. A conversation with her grandmother, where she hinted at knowing more than she should. But each time, fear held her back. It wasn't until she saw a news report about the wrongful conviction review that the guilt became unbearable. Could she live with herself knowing that innocent people had been caged, while the real murderer walked free? And then, one night, she made a decision. She picked up the phone, dialed a number she never thought she would call, and with a deep breath, she told the truth. For 17 years, Marisol Ortega carried a secret that gnawed at her conscience. She tried to bury it under the weight of fear, convincing herself that silence was the safest option. But the moment that changed everything came on an otherwise ordinary evening. Marisol had just come home from work when she turned on the TV. A news segment was airing, one of those in-depth investigative reports about wrongful convictions. But this time, it wasn't just another case. It was their case. The screen showed Charlotte Playtes and Lombardo Palacios, now adults, sitting across from a journalist. Their faces bore the exhaustion of lives stolen, their words heavy with the pain of injustice. Marisol watched, frozen in place, as Charlotte described the years of pleading for someone to listen. The years in a prison cell for a crime she didn't commit. The years Lombardo spent as an innocent teenager behind bars, his childhood ripped away. And then, the words that broke Marisol's silence. We lost everything. But someone out there knows the truth. That night, Marisol sat in her room, staring at her phone. She had rehearsed this moment in her mind countless times, but actually saying the words felt impossible. Who would even believe her? Her uncle, Javier Ortega, had always been careful. The police closed the case years ago. Would they even listen now? She hesitated. Minutes passed. But then, with trembling hands, she dialed the number of the investigative journalist from the documentary. The voice on the other end answered. Marisol took a deep breath. "I have something to tell you, about the Hector Flores case." The words felt like they belonged to someone else, but once they were out, there was no turning back. What Marisol revealed sent shockwaves through the case. She recounted the conversations she had overheard, the way Javier Ortega bragged about fixing the situation after Hector Flores was murdered. She described the bloody clothes she saw him burning in a backyard drum the night after the crime. But more than her testimony, Marisol had something no one expected, a photograph. It was old, slightly faded, but clear enough to see. In the background, a young Marisol stood in her uncle's garage. And right there, behind her, barely noticeable, was Hector Flores's backpack. The same one that had been reported missing from the crime scene. This was something the police had never found. Something that had never been tied to Charlotte Playdes or Lombardo Palacios. But here it was, evidence that could finally change everything. As news of Marisol's confession broke, the reaction was immediate. Under pressure from journalists and wrongful conviction advocates, authorities reopened the case, admitting that Marisol's testimony and the new evidence warranted further investigation. For years, the Flores family had believed that justice had been served. Now, they were faced with the devastating truth: the wrong people had been imprisoned, while the real killer had walked free. The people of East Hollywood had moved on from the case years ago, but now, old wounds were reopening. Had the police rushed to judgment? Had two innocent people been sacrificed in the name of a quick conviction? And the biggest question of all: would justice finally be served? In a dramatic turn of events, the Los Angeles District Attorney's Office, led by Nathan Hochman, conducted a meticulous review of the case that led to the wrongful convictions of Charlotte Playdes and Lombardo Palacios. Their investigation uncovered severe issues with the original proceedings, including coercive interrogation tactics and misleading evidence. The review was initiated under former District Attorney George Gaskin and continued under Hochman, who took decisive action upon assuming office in December 2024. Authorities confirmed that Palacios, who was only 15 at the time, was manipulated into making a false confession after being deceived about the existence of incriminating video evidence. Meanwhile, Playdes was interrogated under similarly questionable circumstances. This new investigation cast serious doubt on the legitimacy of their convictions. On December 23, 2024, Superior Court Judge William C. Ryan vacated the convictions of both Playdes and Palacios, effectively clearing their names after 17 years behind bars. District Attorney Hochman issued an immediate order for their release, emphasizing that the justice system must not only convict the guilty but also correct wrongful convictions whenever they come to light. At a press conference following their release, Hochman assured the public that authorities were actively pursuing leads on the real perpetrators of the 2007 murder of Hector Luis Flores. While specific names were not disclosed, investigators hinted that newly uncovered evidence was leading them toward the true culprits. The emotions following this legal victory were raw and powerful. For Lombardo Palacios, his release felt like a miracle before Christmas. Struggling to process the reality of his newfound freedom, he expressed gratitude while still grappling with the injustice he endured. Charlotte Playdes, who was 2 months pregnant at the time of her wrongful arrest and gave birth while handcuffed in jail, reflected on the unfairness of the justice system. She pointed out that wealth and resources often determine who can effectively fight their charges, leaving people from marginalized communities more vulnerable to wrongful convictions. Though grateful for her release, Playdes admitted she still worries about the system. 17.5 years is a long time. But it did happen. It's some kind of Christmas miracle, she said. However, she also noted the lingering scars of her experience and voiced hope that others who are wrongfully imprisoned will also find justice. As for the victim's family, their reactions remain complex. While some have welcomed the exoneration, others are still seeking closure and justice for Hector Luis Flores, whose true killer remains at large. The DA's office has vowed to continue its pursuit of the real perpetrators, ensuring that justice is served not only for the wrongfully convicted but also for the family of the victim. 17 years behind bars. 17 years of stolen time. Charlotte Playtes and Lombardo Palacio spent nearly 2 decades locked away for a crime they did not commit. Their convictions were based on eyewitness testimony, evidence that has now been proven unreliable. But here's the haunting question: if they had never spoken up, never fought for justice, would the real murderer have ever been caught? The tragic murder of Hector Luis Flores in 2007 set off a chain of events that exposed deep flaws in the justice system. Eyewitness misidentifications, coerced statements, and circumstantial evidence sent 2 innocent people to prison. It took the tireless work of dedicated attorneys, investigators, and the Conviction Review Unit to finally expose the truth. Their story forces us to confront an uncomfortable reality: how many others remain behind bars, waiting for the truth to come to light? Eyewitness testimony has played a crucial role in countless convictions. But cases like this make us ask, how reliable is memory under stress? How many innocent people have been convicted based on nothing more than mistaken identity? What would you have done in Charlotte's position? If the justice system had turned against you, would you have had the strength to keep fighting? Story 4. She was young, vibrant, full of life, until the wrong man walked into it. At first, it seemed like a love story. He showered her with affection, tattoos of her name inked onto his skin, and a whirlwind romance that moved at breakneck speed. But behind closed doors, the fairy tale unraveled into something far more sinister. Slaps turned into bruises. Words became weapons. And every escape attempt ended the same way, dragged back into the nightmare. For 2 years, Kiana Dawes suffered in silence. Police reports, desperate texts to friends, bruises covered by makeup. The warnings were there, but no one acted fast enough. And then, the unthinkable. Before her death, she wrote, "Ryan Wellings killed me." It was a message from beyond the grave, a final plea for justice. But when the case went to trial, the verdict shocked the nation. The man she accused of ruining her life walked free of manslaughter charges. Instead, he smiled, blew a kiss to his new girlfriend, and walked away convicted only of assault and coercive control. Stay with me, because this case will leave you questioning everything about the justice system. The case of Kiana Dawes is one that shook the public, exposing the harrowing depths of domestic abuse and coercive control. At the center of it was Ryan Wellings, a man whose emotional, psychological, and physical abuse would lead to devastating consequences. Kiana Dawes, a 23-year-old hairdresser from Fleetwood, Lancashire, was known as a kind and caring young mother. But beneath the surface of her seemingly normal life, she endured relentless abuse at the hands of her partner. Wellings manipulated her, degraded her, and, according to the prosecution, systematically broke her spirit. His threats were chilling. At one point, he reportedly told her he would throw acid in her face, comparing his intended cruelty to the attack on TV presenter Katie Piper. On another occasion, he threatened to use a drill to remove her teeth. He called her demeaning names and physically assaulted her, once giving her a black eye when she became pregnant. Despite the abuse, Kiana held on for as long as she could. She was diagnosed with an emotionally unstable personality disorder, a condition that Wellings allegedly exploited to maintain control over her. His abuse was not only physical but psychological. He made her believe that every problem was her fault, even when he was the one hurting her. The turning point came on July 22, 2022. That morning, Kiana left her home and drove to a friend's house. She placed her 9-month-old daughter inside the home while the friend was in the shower. Without saying a word, she walked out and never returned. She then drove to a quiet, desolate country lane near the West Coast Main Line and ended her life on the railway tracks. Before she did, she left behind a haunting suicide note. Her final words were not just a goodbye but an accusation, a cry for justice from beyond the grave. The end. I fought hard, I fought long. I went through pain no one could imagine. I was murdered. Ryan Wellings killed me. He ruined every bit of strength I had left. I had dreams. I had a future at one point. That was taken away from me. The dimly lit apartment was silent, except for the heavy breathing coming from the closet. The walls of the small flat had absorbed years of whispered threats and terrified sobs. Kiina had tried to leave before, but every time, she was pulled back, by fear, by manipulation, by the desperate hope that things would change. Neighbors heard faint cries, but they thought it was just the wind. To outsiders, the arguments seemed like mere lovers' quarrels, nothing out of the ordinary. But behind closed doors, it was a war of psychological torment. Every insult, every bruise, every degrading remark chipped away at Kiina's resolve. Kiina's death sparked outrage and mourning, but for her family, justice seemed elusive. Wellings was charged with manslaughter, making him one of the first defendants in the UK to face trial for an unlawful killing linked to a partner's suicide following domestic abuse. However, after a 6-week trial at Preston Crown Court, Wellings was acquitted of manslaughter. Instead, he was convicted of assault and coercive and controlling behavior, receiving a 6.5-year sentence. The judge acknowledged that while he could not be held legally responsible for Kiina's death, he had spent years breaking her down. As the verdict was read, Wellings smirked as he was led away. To Kiina's family, it was a cruel reminder of the power he had wielded over her. Her mother, Angela Dawes, later said, "I truly hope no other young lady or child has to go through what he did to my daughter and her baby. I just wish with all my heart that I could bring her back and say, 'It's okay, you're safe now.'" Ryan Wellings was released from prison after serving part of his 6.5-year sentence for coercive control and assault against Kiina Dawes. Despite being cleared of manslaughter charges, the court acknowledged the severe abuse he inflicted on her, which contributed to her fragile mental state before her suicide. His early release has raised significant concerns, particularly among those who believe the justice system failed to protect victims from further harm. For Dawes' family and supporters, his release was a chilling moment. The fear that he might return to exert control over their lives, particularly given his vow to seek custody of the daughter he had with Kiina, has created an atmosphere of unease. This reflects a broader issue where survivors of domestic abuse, and their families, live in constant anxiety, knowing that abusers often find legal loopholes to return to their lives. After his release, reports of strange occurrences, possible stalking, and renewed threats would be the next terrifying stage of the story. The legal system's hesitance to act without concrete proof echoes a common frustration among victims. Without hard proof, we can't do anything. This waiting game, the period in which an abuser's intentions remain just unclear enough to evade consequences, is often the most psychologically horrifying part of the experience. And then, inevitably, the nightmare returns. The question is not if, but when. Would it be an unexpected knock on the door? A shadow spotted near a workplace? An anonymous message? The tension builds as those who once thought they were free realize they may never truly escape. It was the early hours of the morning when Kiina Dawes made her final, desperate attempt to break free from the torment Ryan Wellings had inflicted upon her. The cycle of coercion, fear, and control had escalated to its most horrifying point. In a note she left behind, Kiina wrote that Wellings had killed her, not with his hands, but with his relentless psychological and physical abuse. The words were chilling. "He ruined every bit of strength I had left." For over 2 years, Wellings had subjected Kiina to an escalating campaign of emotional and physical torture. He had held a drill to her face, threatened to knock out her teeth, and even used acid threats to keep her in line. When she became pregnant, he turned his verbal abuse to her body, calling her fat, while seeking out escorts and prostitutes online. Despite multiple calls to the police, Kiina had been too terrified to follow through with prosecution. Wellings had convinced her that if she reported him, she would lose custody of her child. The authorities responded, but his threats were enough to keep her silent, until one brutal attack finally landed her in the hospital. This time, she reported him. Wellings was arrested following Kiina's hospital visit, but the system failed her one last time. He was released on bail, despite breaking his conditions. Just 4 days later, Kiina took her own life. The suicide note became the most damning piece of evidence against Wellings. It was read aloud in court, her final words shaking the courtroom: "I had dreams. I had a future. That was taken away from me." Prosecutors argued that while he had not been charged with her manslaughter, his coercive control had been the direct cause of her tragic decision. Investigators dug deeper. Phone records, messages, and testimonies painted a harrowing picture of manipulation. Even after Kiina had tried to leave him, Wellings had used social media, phone calls, and threats to keep her under his control. He not only abused her physically but also psychologically, targeting her mental health vulnerabilities, calling her names linked to her struggles, and even telling her that she may as well kill herself. As the case unfolded, the courtroom became a battleground for justice. Wellings denied all allegations, telling the jury, "I'm not a monster." But his words fell flat in the face of overwhelming evidence. Kiina's family members took the stand, their voices filled with anguish. Her mother, Angela Dawes, spoke directly to the judge. "It breaks my heart that my beautiful baby's daughter will grow up without her mummy because of that monster." Kiina's grandmother described the moments she had seen the truth behind her granddaughter's false smile. Her brother, Kynan Dawes, expressed his lifelong regret for introducing Kiina to Wellings in the first place. The judge, Robert Altham, delivered a scathing rebuke before issuing the sentence. "She pleaded with you to stop hitting her, but you just carried on. You made her believe it was her fault. You controlled her, isolated her, and made her feel like she had no escape." Finally, the verdict was announced. Ryan Wellings was sentenced to 6.5 years in prison for coercive control, an outcome that, while delivering justice, felt painfully insufficient to those who had lost Kiina. As the judge's gavel slammed down, this time, it was final. Justice had come, but at a devastating cost. After Ryan Wellings' conviction for prolonged domestic abuse against Kiina Dawes, but not for her manslaughter, the aftermath of the case revealed unsettling details that left lingering doubts about justice. Kiina Dawes' family, devastated by the verdict, continues to seek justice and raise awareness about the failures of the legal system. Her suicide note specifically mentioned that she hoped the police would act faster in cases like hers, highlighting the slow response to her repeated cries for help. She had contacted law enforcement at least 5 times, but due to fear and threats from Wellings, she often downplayed the abuse, preventing immediate intervention. Meanwhile, Wellings' mother and girlfriend are under investigation for allegedly coaching him on how to testify in court, raising concerns about potential witness tampering. While Wellings is now in prison, the deep trauma inflicted on Kiina's family cannot be undone. Her young daughter, who was left in the care of a friend before Kiina took her own life, will grow up without her mother. Additionally, 3 police officers now face disciplinary proceedings for their failure to act decisively when Kiina sought help, a grim reminder that justice delayed can be justice denied. The case leaves critical questions unanswered. Did the justice system fail Kiina Dawes? Despite evidence of repeated domestic violence, the legal process was slow, and she was unable to receive adequate protection before her death. Were there other victims? Given Wellings' history of coercive control and violence, could there be others who have suffered but never came forward? Why wasn't he convicted of manslaughter? Although Kiina left behind a note stating, "Ryan Wellings killed me," the court found insufficient legal grounds to convict him for her death, raising concerns about how abuse-related suicides are prosecuted. The most terrifying aspect of this case isn't just what happened, it's what could happen again. Even with Wellings behind bars, his influence may linger. The failure of authorities to protect Kiina in time is a stark warning that many victims of domestic abuse are still unheard, still unprotected, and still at risk. And here's the scariest part: someone like him could be living right next door. What do you think? Should the justice system have stopped him sooner? Should law enforcement have done more when Kiina Dawes reported the abuse, or did the system fail her completely? Kiina was not just another statistic. She was a mother, a daughter, a woman who tried to escape the nightmare of domestic violence but was met with delays, bureaucracy, and indifference. She called the police 5 times. 5. And yet, the man she feared was still able to manipulate, control, and destroy her life. But here's the terrifying truth: Kiina's story is not unique. Every year, countless victims report abuse, only to see their cries dismissed or delayed. Many don't live to tell their stories. Have you ever felt like someone dangerous was still out there? If this case sends chills down your spine, remember, this is not a horror movie. It's real life. Story 5. February 14, 2000. A day meant for love and celebration. But in the small town of Shelby, North Carolina, the Degree family would remember it for something else entirely: the day their world was shattered. That night, as rain pattered against the windows and the wind howled through the trees, Harold and Aquila Degree believed their children, 9-year-old Asha and 10-year-old O'Brien, were safe in their beds. The family had spent the day together, attending church in the morning and then visiting relatives. Asha, a bright and cautious girl, had laughed and played like she always did. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. But at some point in the night, something changed. At 2:30 a.m., Harold checked in on the children. Asha was there, curled under the covers, sound asleep. Reassured, he went back to bed. But unknown to him, within the next 90 minutes, his daughter would vanish into the night. Outside, the storm worsened. A power outage struck the neighborhood briefly, plunging the Degree home into darkness. The kind of night where most children would cling to their blankets for warmth and security. But Asha, timid, afraid of the dark, and terrified of dogs, somehow found herself outside, walking alone into the unknown. By 6:30 a.m., the Degrees awoke to the sound of an alarm clock. It was time to get the kids ready for school. Aquila went to their shared bedroom to wake them. O'Brien stirred, groggy but present. Asha's bed, however, was empty. At first, Aquila assumed Asha had already gotten up. Perhaps she was in the bathroom. But minutes passed, and there was no sign of her. The closet? Empty. The living room? No trace. The kitchen? Silent. Panic began to rise in her chest. Harold joined the search, calling Asha's name through the house. No answer. The front door was locked. The windows were secured. There were no signs of forced entry. And yet, their 9-year-old daughter had disappeared without a trace. The only thing missing: Asha's book bag, a few items of clothing, and a Tweety Bird purse. Desperate, the Degrees ran outside, calling into the crisp morning air. They knocked on neighbors' doors, searched the yard, and checked the street. Nothing. It was as if Asha had been plucked from existence. Then came the first chilling clue. By mid-morning, reports surfaced from 2 motorists who had been driving along Highway 18, a desolate stretch of road about a mile from the Degrees' home. Both had seen a young girl, walking alone in the storm. One driver, a trucker, recalled the moment with eerie clarity. He had seen her, a small figure, drenched from the rain, walking determinedly along the highway's shoulder. It was unusual. Who would let a child be out at that hour, in such conditions? Concerned, he turned his rig around, intending to stop and check on her. But by the time he got back, she was gone. Had she run into the woods? Had someone picked her up? The questions were endless, but one fact remained: Asha Degree had walked away from her home that night. And she was never seen again. Authorities launched an extensive search for Asha Degree after she vanished from her home in Shelby, North Carolina, on February 14, 2000. Investigators deployed tracking dogs, but no scent trail could be found. The first potential leads came when two separate witnesses reported seeing a girl matching Asha's description walking along Highway 18 in the early morning hours. One driver attempted to approach her, but she reportedly ran into the woods and disappeared. That was the last confirmed sighting of Asha Degree. The day after Asha's disappearance, police discovered a small clue: her hair bow was found inside a nearby shed. Despite a week-long search spanning 9,000 man-hours, covering a 2-by-3 mile radius, authorities found no further evidence pointing to her whereabouts. The case remained at a standstill until August 3, 2001, when construction workers unearthed a double-wrapped plastic bag containing Asha's backpack in Burke County, 30 miles away from her home. The bag contained some of her personal belongings, including a New Kids on the Block t-shirt and a Dr. Seuss book titled McElligot's Pool, a book that had been checked out from Asha's elementary school library, despite no record of her ever borrowing it. The discovery of Asha's backpack was a chilling moment in the investigation. Authorities sent the items to the FBI for further analysis, but the contents did not provide any immediate leads. The location of the discovery, so far from her home, suggested that Asha had not simply wandered away on her own. Instead, it raised stronger suspicions that she had been abducted or otherwise met with foul play. With no further evidence emerging, the case remained cold for several years. In 2004, authorities received a tip from an incarcerated individual claiming that Asha had been killed and buried, but when police investigated the site, they only found animal remains. Despite renewed public interest, media coverage, and continuous appeals from Asha's family, no conclusive breakthroughs have been made. This discovery of the backpack remains one of the most puzzling aspects of the case. Why was it buried in a remote area? Who placed it there? And most importantly, where is Asha? Investigators continue to hope that someone, somewhere, holds the key to solving this heartbreaking mystery. Asha Degree's family has remained unwavering in their pursuit of answers, ensuring that her disappearance is never forgotten. Harold and Aquila Degree, along with Asha's older brother, O'Brien, continue to keep her case in the public eye through interviews, memorial walks, and collaborations with law enforcement. Every year, on the anniversary of her disappearance, the community participates in a prayer walk retracing Asha's last known steps. This event serves as both a tribute and a reminder that her case remains open. In September 2024, significant developments emerged when investigators searched several properties connected to Roy and Connie Dedman. The search warrant suggested that authorities believe Asha may have been killed and her body hidden. However, no arrests have been made, and her family still holds on to the hope that she is alive. O'Brien Degree, reflecting on the emotional toll of the case, has expressed a mix of emotions: rage, sadness, hope, and determination. He firmly believes in his faith and continues to pray for answers. Despite the passing years, the Degree family remains steadfast, refusing to give up their search for the truth about what happened to Asha. For years, the case of Asha Degree remained a haunting mystery, her fate unknown, her whereabouts lost in time. But in 2024, a shocking development reignited the investigation, bringing both hope and chilling revelations. In September 2024, federal and local authorities executed a search warrant at a property in Cleveland County, North Carolina. This was no routine search. It was the result of a tip that had linked the property's owner, Roy Lee Dedman, and his family to Asha's disappearance. What they found was enough to change the course of the case. Parked on the property was a 1964 AMC Rambler, a vehicle eerily similar to the one witness described seeing on the night Asha vanished. Even more alarming was the discovery of forensic evidence, hair strands and genetic material, pointing investigators to a direct link between Asha and individuals tied to the property. Then, in February 2025, a witness came forward with a disturbing claim. The man, who had attended parties with the Dedman family in the early 2000s, recalled a chilling moment when Lizzie Foster, one of Dedman's daughters, broke down in tears and admitted, "I killed Asha Degree." Her sister's reaction was immediate, furious, and almost panicked, telling her to be quiet. It was a fleeting moment, lost in the noise of the gathering, but it stuck with the witness for decades. Now, it could be the key to unlocking the truth. Investigators swiftly obtained search warrants for Foster's phone and electronic records. What they uncovered was a web of cryptic messages exchanged between Foster and her sisters, including urgent pleas not to speak to anyone and messages of overwhelming anxiety. One text message simply read, "This is a nightmare. I'm shaking and can't walk now, either." Another showed a family member advising Foster to stop communicating with anyone outside of legal representation. Despite these significant breakthroughs, no arrests have been made. Authorities remain cautious, determined to build an airtight case before making any official charges. The latest developments, however, have given Asha's family new hope that the truth, buried for 25 years, may finally come to light. 25 years have passed since 9-year-old Asha Degree left her home in the middle of the night and vanished without a trace. What really happened that stormy February night? Was Asha running away from something, or someone? Or was she manipulated, tricked, or outright taken against her will? New search warrants and evidence have reignited speculation about her case, raising chilling questions. A long-lost vehicle. Cryptic text messages. A potential confession at a party. And the ever-lingering mystery of a backpack found miles away from where she was last seen. Today, we explore the leading theories surrounding Asha Degree's disappearance. Theory 1. Asha left voluntarily but fell victim to foul play. Asha's family has consistently maintained that she was a happy child with no reason to run away. But something led her to pack a small bag, slip out of her home before dawn, and walk into the darkness of a cold February morning. Multiple witnesses saw her along Highway 18, walking in the rain. One truck driver even turned around to check on her, but Asha ran into the woods. If she had been meeting someone, was she afraid of being seen? Or did she get lost and then find herself in the path of a predator? Some investigators believe that Asha did leave voluntarily but was then lured into a vehicle, possibly by someone she knew. This theory gained traction after a new search warrant uncovered a 1964 AMC Rambler tied to a Cleveland County property. Witnesses from the time recalled seeing a car like this near the scene of Asha's last known whereabouts. Theory 2. The 1964 AMC Rambler and a possible cover-up. For years, law enforcement has sought information about a vehicle seen near Highway 18 the morning Asha disappeared. In 2024, investigators seized a car matching the description, a green 1964 AMC Rambler, owned by Roy Lee Dedman, whose property was searched by the FBI and local authorities. Even more alarming were the text messages discovered during the investigation. Messages from Dedman's daughter, Lizzie Foster, expressed extreme anxiety over the investigation, stating, "This is a nightmare, and there is no way this is going to be okay." Another message from a family member read, "The theory is I did it. Accident. Covered it up." If Asha was taken by someone in the Rambler that night, did she suffer an accident that was later concealed? Was she kept alive for some time? And if so, why did no one come forward in all these years? Theory 3, a possible confession. In September 2024, a witness came forward with a shocking statement. He recalled attending a party in the early 2000s with Lizzie Foster and her sister, Sarah Capel. According to his account, Lizzie, while intoxicated, broke down in tears, repeating, "I killed Asha Degree." Her sister immediately reacted, grabbing her and yelling at her to be quiet. Was this an admission of guilt? Drunken exaggeration? Or a misplaced attempt at getting attention? The text messages and polygraph results add weight to the suspicion that at least some members of the Dedman family know more than they have admitted. Theory 4, the backpack and the unanswered questions. Over a year after Asha disappeared, her backpack was discovered buried in plastic on a construction site in Burke County, 30 miles away from Shelby. The items inside were puzzling, a Dr. Seuss book that didn't belong to her and a concert t-shirt from a nearby town. If Asha was taken, why was her backpack buried instead of simply discarded? Could the items in the bag suggest she was held for some time? If so, was she alive long after the night she vanished? Another chilling possibility, did the backpack serve as a planted piece of evidence, a way to mislead investigators about her true fate? Conclusion: is the truth finally emerging? For decades, Asha Degree's disappearance has remained one of North Carolina's greatest mysteries. But with newly uncovered evidence, cryptic text messages, and a possible connection to a long-abandoned vehicle, are we finally inching closer to answers? The investigation is still ongoing, and authorities urge anyone with information to come forward. Could someone out there still hold the key to solving this case? And more importantly, will Asha's family ever receive the closure they have sought for 25 long years? If you have any tips, contact the Cleveland County Sheriff's Office or the FBI. Until then, the mystery remains. Despite 25 years passing since Asha Degree's disappearance, law enforcement remains actively engaged in solving the case. Recent developments indicate that investigators executed new search warrants in Cleveland County, North Carolina, in September 2024. Authorities seized multiple items of interest and towed a car matching the description of a vehicle sought in connection with Asha's case. These findings have reignited efforts to find answers, although no arrests have been made yet. Further investigation has led authorities to classify Asha as a victim of homicide, with documents suggesting that her body was concealed. A search warrant tied to a property on Cherryville Road in Shelby uncovered evidence linked to the case, and a hair sample recovered from a bag of items found in 2001 reportedly helped lead investigators to this location. Witness testimony from 2000 suggested that Asha was seen being pulled into a car resembling the one recently seized. The community continues to demand justice, and Asha's family remains hopeful for answers. The FBI is still offering a $25,000 reward for information that leads to an arrest, emphasizing the ongoing commitment to solving this decades-old mystery.